Hello and welcome to the Mindful Mobility Tech Talks. I'm Madeline Reznick, Program Manager of the Green Transportation Summit Expo and the Communications and Outreach Manager at the Columbia Willamette Clean Cities Coalition. I've been working in the transportation space for over 8 years with a strong focus on supporting fleets since 2020. Today, I'm excited to introduce our guest and dive into a powerful decarbonization tool, one that she believes in and champions. Let's explore why it matters and how it can help drive sustainable change.
I'm Allison Eames. I'm the Director of Carbon Intelligence and Analytics at Rappel. At Rappel, I am the architect of our COAIM model. So that stands for our Carbon Optimized Asset Level Investment Model software, which we use to guide fleets and, all types of companies to design strategies around and transition to low carbon operations with scalable asset level carbon and economic modeling. I'm based in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I have spent most of my career working on vehicle transportation, electrification, and other forms of decarbonization. But when I'm not thinking about electrifying cars, I am thinking about boats because I have the privilege of also living on a boat full time in the Bay.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that before we started recording, and it sounds really interesting and cool. And we're excited to have you on today's episode. We're curious, what's one challenge or opportunity that you're seeing that you think most people should be paying attention to?
Yeah, definitely. So I think one of the biggest challenges in fleet or really any decarbonization right now at the company level is moving from strategy to implementation. And I think specifically there's a challenge in fleet decarbonization, which I kind of call the strategy operations gap. So, more and more companies are setting targets of some kind for decarbonization, but often these targets are coming from leadership and kind of top down, and they're set without evaluating the implications in depth beforehand. So I've seen a lot of fleet decarbonization, specifically strategies, fall flat because leadership didn't get the input and buy-in from the operational stakeholders who are ultimately the ones implementing the strategy. So a common example of this is using, marginal abatement cost curves or MACC analysis, which ranks options by cost effectiveness, but it also oversimplifies the challenge and it treats all your assets as uniform, more or less. It ignores operational variability that we know is really important for fleet decarbonization. So ignoring, vehicle types, duty cycles, infrastructure constraints, different financial realities in different locations. And I think that most people would know there's not usually a one size fits all solution unless you're, a really large company who is decided, we're going 100% EVs and they can really kind of have the financial ability to do that. But we work mostly with non-enterprise scale customers, and they're more cost sensitive and really want to find solutions that are going to be financially optimal as well. So to bridge this gap, we really believe that analysis has to go beyond that cost. And specifically, I talk about 4 different dimensions that I think MACC analysis or that higher level analysis doesn't capture. So the first one is asset specific. So I've already kind of hit on this, but really do believe that carbon and financial modeling should be capturing that equipment is varying by age, location, operational usage, et cetera. And decarbonization really does happen ultimately at the asset level. So incorporating these things is really important. The second dimension is to be time linked. So decarbonization is a phased process. So to kind of flatten that into one dimension is doing your strategy a disservice in a way. So I really think you should be using that to your advantage. And if you look across replacement cycles in the next 5-10 years, you might actually uncover that you might have more than one chance to replace a certain vehicle, or, you might be able to do certain things in one location first and then phase them in somewhere else over time. And you can also include projections on technology, fuel, emission factors, and get a lot more nuanced of a picture over time. Third one is to be dynamic. So Combining and stacking different actions can lead to different financial or carbon implications. So when you just kind of look asset by asset or technology by technology in a MACC analysis, you're missing those interactions between different technologies and different assets. So in our modeling, we consider, an entire company's asset portfolio, including building systems, including renewables if they exist. And I think an example of this would be, if you were going to install an on-site solar system, that's going to have really big impact on the financial payback of, a building efficiency upgrade or something like that. And it also would have a big effect on if you install EV charging, what is the emission factor that you should be considering there? And maybe that improves your cost to carbon ratio of implementing those actions. So we literally perform an optimization on all those possibilities and pick the most financially attractive stacks of action over time to achieve a carbon goal. And then the last one that I'll say is to be flexible. So I think this word is doing a lot of heavy lifting in this context. Flexibility means a lot of different things, but I think critical for closing the strategy operations gap is to be able to talk about your strategy and talk about your plan at the level that is suitable for given stakeholders. So when I talk about flexibility, I mean being able to slice and group your strategy in different ways and depths. The operations stakeholder is going to want to go really deep and understand all of the details, but your CEO might just want to know the high level trajectory, overall cost it's going to take, those types of details. And then they also have to evolve over time. So, being flexible to different constraints and macro environment changes over time, capital regulations, all of those pieces. And so in a nutshell, those are the different dimensions that I think are really important to consider when designing the strategy in the first place, rather than kind of starting from the high level strategy and then trying to figure out what exactly you need to do about it. And that will really create a much more nuanced picture that aligns all of your stakeholders from the beginning and allows you to, when you get into the implementation of that strategy, really have something that is actionable. The last thing I'll say is that this approach usually reveals a lot of nuances. So rather than, picking a technology and evaluating that technology across your whole fleet, we have a more, like I said, asset specific picture. And we might see that you have different financially viable opportunities in different locations, or even in the same location across different assets, or even within the same type of asset, depending on how they're being used. So I already kind of gave the example of maybe having a couple of replacement cycles. So I think hybrid vehicles often come up as a way to kind of bridge the gap between traditional vehicle combustion engine to EVs in the next couple of years, and other more creative solutions like downsizing, route optimization, idle reduction technology. All of these things can kind of dissuade the all or nothing fears in operational stakeholders and also highlight, good and bad candidates for alternatives within your fleet. So this framework I see as really critical for making real progress and not ending up in kind of never-ending cycle of stakeholder management to try to implement a strategy.
Definitely. And I really appreciate you walking through the different points, right? Of like the analysis going beyond cost. When you were talking about asset specific, time linked, dynamic, and flexible, you dove into a little bit more detail about what those considerations really mean. But I think it offers a bigger picture look of it's not just cost, because there are a lot of other factors that go into successful fleet management. And a fleet, its main goal is to run and to do its job successfully. And I know that that's something that fleet managers are, they're balancing the fleet professionals all the way from the top down. They all have their hands in this at some point. One thing that I wanted to touch on that you had mentioned, about the like non-enterprise scale customers that you work with. Would you be able to share a little bit about like what kinds of applications you see with these fleets? Like, for example, like what's the fleet size? What are they, what are the operations that you've been able to see success with this approach?
Yeah, definitely. So at Rappel, and in my previous role before Rappel, I was, more in consulting on those larger scale fleets. At Rappel, like I said, we work with smaller fleets, but we do work with a wide range of sizes and apply the same exact framework no matter what size it is. And the way that we're able to do that, like I said, is through the scaled modeling that we do that really has a set, number of inputs and has scaled a lot of the analysis that I just talked about to be more automatic and allow you to access that type of depth of analysis regardless of the size that you are. So on the smaller end, we have customers that we work with who have, on the order of tens of vehicles. An example would be, warehousing and furniture distribution operation that's more regional. And then on the large side, we have national fleets that we also work with who do utility services or landscaping, and they have a lot more complicated operations, a lot more types of vehicles, obviously different locations and different operations that are, maybe decentralized as well. And so the strategy is different in how it gets implemented, but the building blocks of that strategy really are the same. And that is taking the asset specific information on the vehicle and then combining that with a lot of the data that we bring to the table and offer on location specific costs and that type of thing to really build that full picture. So in terms of, the types of solutions that we see, like I said, it builds out that more nuanced picture. So it almost never does the answer come back that you should do 100% of your vehicles, 100% of your light duty pickups should be electrified. It usually comes back as, a mix of solutions depending on the use case of the vehicle, the incentives that might be available, the operations, and the feasibility based on their operations. And so, usually it's a mix of, hybridization or, alternative fuels like, propane or, in some cases, renewable fuels or electrification, coming into the picture in a phased way over time where you're kind of building that electrification of your vehicles into your fleet over the next 5-10 years. And that's usually the more economical way of doing it, right? As we expect EV costs to decline, to become more available, those types of things, that's when the economics start to change. So it really depends, but I would say that we are able to kind of model across those many different types of applications, locations, operations, and it usually comes back with this nuanced picture of what makes sense and when.
Certainly. Thank you for elaborating on that. And I think there are many of our listeners that are in that same boat, whether they're, or in your case, you're in a boat, but or they may be in the same truck or car, situation where they're looking and they have their, I lost my train of thought because I made that joke.
No problem.
Yeah, so
Bronze.
I think that's a lot. Many of our listeners are in that situation where they have a fleet that operates in either a predictable or unpredictable way. They have there's energy needs, there's time needs, there's many factors, and I appreciate you sharing. And there are solutions out there like what Rappel offers to help kind of take the shared learnings from these situations and apply them uniquely to each of these fleet applications, because we know that fleets are constantly being asked to do more with limited resources. And as GTSC and Clean Cities coalitions, we see this close up. We see firsthand that there's only so much time in the day, only so many resources. And so could you share a little bit more about, like, what this means for fleets in the broader aspects, especially, like, as they're on their process or on their journey to decarbonization, how can fleets align on a strategy from the beginning and have that foresight while being, in 2024 or 25?
Yeah, definitely. It's a challenge, it took, as you said, a lot of companies who are in this boat, who are facing these pressures to decarbonize from whether it be investors, whether it be customers that they're selling their services to, whether it be, regulations that are coming down the pipeline. more and more companies and smaller companies are facing these pressures to act and to kind of get their strategies together. And absolutely, the resource constraints can make that really challenging. I think that, as I've shared, I think that getting to that next level of depth in the analysis is really important to do, even in the situation where you're kind of doing an internal analysis. I guess what I would say is, there's levels to that. And, even if you're not working with someone like Rappel or, a third party provider to help you figure that out, there are still elements of this approach that I think can be really useful. So, obviously, as I said, bridging that strategy operations gap and trying to co-create your strategy from the beginning rather than a top-down approach. I would really recommend taking it in that direction. And as you are doing that, it doesn't have to be, as in depth as we get to at Rappel if you aren't able to do that in the first pass. But I would say, digging into those asset specific constraints, your location specific constraints, the different options. And as I said, the element of time. I think the element of time is something that's really often overlooked in how you might phase an approach and kind of what that means for how far you're able to get or what target you should be setting. All of those things can help align stakeholders from the beginning and avoid some of the pitfalls that I've seen, right? Where you end up kind of going back to the drawing board over and over because when the rubber meets the road, that's when people kind of look deeper and say, oh, shoot, how are we actually going to achieve this? And that's when the operational stakeholders, often have pushback. And yeah, sometimes, in reality, that leads to indecision and spinning of the wheels, if I may, that can make it challenging. So while it seems like a big endeavor at the beginning to undertake some of this deeper analysis, it can really pay dividends down the road to have all of your stakeholders more aligned. Oh, I think that you're muted.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And we can see that that payback comes in many different ways. Like you're talking about dividends, real financial implications, ease of the employees' lives, a cohesion between the team, but also just like a larger impact from operations. So, yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that because, with tools like yours, like it almost using data logistics, like you can almost gain a team member and that definitely helps fleets make smarter, more efficient decisions that can drive their success. So I really appreciate you, yeah, taking that time today. As we end towards our close, I wanted to kind of reflect on what we were talking about today and kind of share, your solution allows fleets to analyze the slight but crucial differences between their assets, like factoring in vehicle types, duty cycles, replacement timelines, and location specific constraints. Instead of like relying on these more broad averages, the fleets can create a targeted financial viable plan that actually works in the real world. And since we're recording this in March, it's kind of makes me think about tax season, April. It's like similar to like itemizing your tax deductions versus using the standard deduction. You might think that taking the standard, or you might be tempted to take the more standard approach because that seems easier, one size fits all. But when you really start to perhaps dive into your operations, you might be able to find that there's more specific situations that apply to your group, and you might be able to make more cost effective ways that also reduce emissions along the way. So I know that we talked a lot about this tool that's present. I'm curious if you have any other comments or closing thoughts as we wrap up.
No, and I like that analogy a lot. I think that's a great point that taking the high level approach, you might miss out on some of the benefits of the nuances that you could uncover. And also, yeah, so I think that that's a great approach. And I think just to kind of reiterate, at the end of the day, fleet decarbonization isn't just about picking a technology, right? It's really about making data-driven business decisions in the same way that you would across all aspects of your business. And so I think that's something that I definitely feel passionate about. And I think that, as I said, higher level strategy sometimes can fall short because it oversimplifies your cost effectiveness and might ignore some of your constraints. And static strategies, don't evolve with replacement cycles, regulations, company priorities. All this to say, decarbonization is not simple. It never has been, but I think a more dynamic analysis can help reduce friction between stakeholders and can help you build momentum over time. And ultimately, decarbonization is not an all or nothing endeavor. So we have to be honest with ourselves and get moving.
Great. Yeah. And so I have here too, and that if listeners want to learn more, they can reach out at repelclimate.com or reach out to you on LinkedIn, Allison Eames. So I wanted to say thank you. And we hope that some of our listeners reach out to you and keep the conversation going. Our group is looking forward to continuing our conversations at our annual conference, now taking place in June the 10th through the 12th in the Greater Tacoma Convention Center. Thank you, Allison, and we are excited to keep the conversations going.
Thanks so much, Maddie.
Thank you.